beyond the budgetary allowances.
Okay. Moving on to community and economic development, it's going from $3,000 to $4,000, an extra $1,000. What is that for? First of all, community and economic development. What is that?
Community and economic development really only include two line items in our budget, and this is a great area where it's in any other budget it would almost be absorbed, but since there's only two line items in the budget that actually factor into this one category, it gets its own little marquee. The two are planning and zoning and weed control.
Weed control.
Weed control.
Nice.
Yes. And it looks like this year that for the first time, it looks like we may come close to spending every bit of P&Z's money, and weed control it looks like it's going to be just a little bit over. So it was a situation where we're probably going to end up being $200 or $300 over for the year, and so it was a scenario where, based on the fact that it's such a small amount of the budget but has to be categorized out differently, it ends up getting marked.
Sure, and that's required by state, as
Correct.
you said earlier. Okay, here we go. $50,000. General government.
Well, general government, of course, that would include all of the FEMA costs that don't fall into our departmental category. For instance, the tree limb removing company. We'll end up spending about $12,000, I think it's $10,800 is what we have them contracted for. Every bit of that would come out of the miscellaneous general policy and administration budget. So you can see how $50,000, when the bulk of the FEMA cost would be in this particular category, anything that doesn't fall into anything else would automatically start falling into this category. For instance, the chipping of the wood behind the VFW would be included in that line item as well. Then there was another aspect of it that you have to include as well. Any cost that we spent during the event. For instance, you might remember we purchased the generator during the event for the shelter. We had to do it there on the spot. Well, that was not purchased for the purposes of a particular department. So that also falls under the general government. And of course, so there's a significant amount of cost associated with the storm that would fall into the the guidelines of the general government.
Okay. Moving on to debt service, that's going to be the same.
Right.
And debt service is?
Debt service is the payments we make against our bonds and loans.
And capital projects, that is zero all the way across.
And that is major cost dollar projects that are not involved in utilities. Because, of course, utilities
what would be a good example of
a streetscape program would be a good example of a major capital project.
Okay. What are we down to here? Total government activities. That would be $111,000.
Mm-hmm. That's
just all of those. That's just all of those added up.
Correct. And you need to understand that what they refer to as the government activities budget is everything but utilities. Because remember, tax dollars don't go to supporting utilities. So there is a division at the state level between funds, your general government, which is funded by tax dollars, and what they refer to as usually they refer to it as your business expenditures, which is your utility expenditures.
And then you can see that on the next line, the business type enterprises. Those are the utilities, the things that are running independently of the...
Yes, that is all of your utilities. That'd be your storm sewer, your sanitary sewer, your recycling, your solid waste pickup, your natural gas, your water. All of those would bulk together to be your business activities.
And you're not amending the budget to spend any more money with them. So the next line, the total activities and business expenditures together still equal $111,000.
Correct, and a lot of that has to do with there's usually some internal differences, but with the sewer project going on, such a large portion of that budget expectation is the loan and grant money coming in for the project and then going back out the door for the project. I believe it makes up nearly 75% of our overall business activity fund activities this year.
Okay. See where we at? We are down to transfers out. Now there's no additional transfers out going out on this amendment.
Mm-hmm.
But could you explain what that is?
Sure. We are required to, during the fiscal year, hold off the local option sales tax money, as a great example, separately from the budget the entire year. And then at the end of the year, we then transfer that money from a trust and agency account into the general fund so that it can fund the purposes it was created for. And remember that, and that's not entirely true either, because 20% of the money is actually transferred out and sent to debt service, and 80% of that money is transferred out and sent to the general fund.
Okay.
And then it funds most of our capital projects in places like the parks and the pool, those type of places. It will be the money we'll be using to replace our heater at the pool, doing those type of activities.
Okay, then we come to the total expenditures and transfers out. That's everything added together so far, and that's still an additional $111,000.
Mm-hmm. Of which all but roughly $16,000 of it you can directly contribute to the FEMA disaster.
Okay, the next line can be kind of confusing. Excess revenues and other sources, over, under, expenditures, transfers out, fiscal year. That ends up being negative $111,000. Is that right?
Correct. What it's looking at is it's looking at the factor of how much revenue you claim is the amending revenue number, and that's subtracting your amending expense number, and that's where it comes up with the negative.
And that's why it's negative.
Correct, because we're not amending any revenue line items.
Continuing appropriations have a not applicable on it. Why is that?
That's built in by the state.
Okay.
I don't
Just something
have,
that has to be
actually,
included on a budget amendment?
Actually, I have no continuing, anything that would qualify as a continuing appropriation. So those are projects that are 10-year projects going on that have that qualify for being considered not a capital project, but a continuing appropriation project.
Okay. Now the beginning fund balance, July 1, that was 2009?
That would have been July 1st of 2009.
2009.
Mm-hmm.
That hasn't changed.
I hope it would not.
It doesn't usually, right? If you amend the budget right.
It'd be awfully hard for it to change. Yes.
Okay, and then the ending balance for June 30 this year, 2010, is $111,000 left, or less, or
correct.
Negative.
Correct. What you might notice is actually still an increase from the previous year. Whereas we ended the particular year at 990, the estimate is that we would begin next year at 1.1, mm-hmm. which is still, it's a little less, about $150,000 more. But that's kind of a misnomer too, because we have, for instance, the long-term fire capital, which the fire board makes a determination on what they spend their long-term money on. You might remember last year they bought a roof for the fire department.
Sure.
But this year they didn't have any major capital expense. So that $10,000 or so that goes into their fund, and I'm just using it as an example, isn't being spent. So there's a $10,000 increase from one year to the other that I don't have the authority to spend in any purpose. That's the overall cash holdings or assets holdings expectations for the city at the end of the fiscal year. And so you have to take that type of stuff. It's a little bit, I don't really like the way the state does this, because this 1.1 makes the impression that we are holding more money year over year. Mm-hmm. However, it doesn't really add up that way. And you and I have talked about this before. Our rollover in the general fund is probably 10%
Sure.
of that overall number.
Okay. Is there anything else?